So welcome back to Stories from the Trenches, the podcast that's hosted by the Sales Enablement Society. I am your host, Juliana Stancampiano, and I am here today with Paul Butterfield from Vonage. And I'm going to let Paul give an introduction of himself and a little bit of background, and then we're going to dive into some great experience that he has to share with all of our listeners. So Paul, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Juliana. Glad to be here. Appreciate it. As you said, I'm with Vonage. My role is I'm Global Head of Sales Enablement here. I am part of a great team of folks. We support about 500 quota carriers globally. And we are in the communication software space, everything from unified communications that people might be familiar with, to cloud-based contact center, to using software APIs to drive digital transformation. So the team, there's a lot of different sorts of enablement that we provide.
Terrific. And we were, just chatting and getting prepped, and you were telling me about your background. Can you share with your listeners kind of where you came from and how you stumbled into sales enablement, as so many people have done over the years?
Stumble might be a really good word. So I most of my career, I've been in sales ever since school, but I've been involved with technology sales, primarily software, carrying a bag and leading sales teams for the better part of 20 years. And in the last sales leadership role I was in, I was a director over our mid-market East, SaaS company, publicly traded. And I went in for a life-changing one-on-one. I thought I was going to go in, we're going to talk about pipeline. But my new EVP of sales, he'd only been with us maybe a month. We didn't even talk about pipeline. He went over to his whiteboard and he wrote 2 words on it. I'll still remember. And he wrote sales enablement. And I thought about it would have been October of 2012. And I didn't tell him this, but I had to go Google sales enablement because I honestly hadn't heard the term at the time. But then he started to map out his vision. He was getting ready to triple the sales force, open up a few new routes to market, and his mandate was to grow us by 2 or 3x in a very short order. And he wasn't willing to do any of that without some fundamental things. And by fundamental, I mean just a sales boot camp, ramping, standardized company pitch, all that type of thing. And we at that time had nothing like that. Everyone in sales sat in the 2.5-day seminar with HR along with the rest of all the new employees, and then it was really up to every sales leader to figure out what they were going to do to develop that new salesperson. That was a charge that I always took very seriously. We enticed someone to come on, painted a vision for them, and we really owe it to them to set them up in every way for success. And so he loved what I had been doing to develop my team, both when they were new and in their career. And his words basically were, I can replace you as a sales director, but you know how we sell. You sit on the front line. I need you to figure out how to take what you do and scale it to across my organization. He gave me the weekend to think about it, and I came back on Monday and accepted the challenge, and turned out I really enjoyed doing it. And here we are. That was a few years ago now.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love that it was 2011, and we talk about this as the Sales Enablement Society and how new sales enablement still is for so many industries and people. And while we know it, I would say, a lot more with maybe in tech industries, it's still, a burgeoning role in a lot of different companies, and we're trying to define it and what does it mean. And so it's great. I love it that you had to Google it. I think that's terrific. I'd be curious to know what that Google search turned up in 2011. That would be interesting to know.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you one thing. I can tell you one thing I remember. I don't know if it was in that first Google search, but very early in my journey into sales enablement, I discovered the work and the writing of Robert Jefferson. And honestly, he has become, he doesn't know this, but he's become somewhat of, my sales enablement virtual mentor. The things that his concepts, I've always loved his concept of you train animals, but you enable humans. And a lot that I've learned from him over the years. And I do remember that was one of the earliest things that I found very helpful.
That's awesome. So I'm curious to know at that time, and where did you start? And you obviously you had a sales leader who supported it because he was really asking you to come in and start doing this. But where did you find that you started, and how did it evolve and grow in order to help him accomplish the goals that he was trying to push forward for the business?
That's a great question. As I think many of us are, I started off as an army of one. And
yep.
we had a couple of things needed to happen. First, as I mentioned, there was no, what do you want to call it, sales academy, boot camp, different words for the same thing. And so this was mid-October, mind you, and he let me know that his round of a new higher-level enterprise sales rep he was going to be hiring, the first group he was targeting to come through mid-December before the holidays, and asked that I have a boot camp ready for them. Like, okay. So that was number one. And number two was I had used a well-known sales methodology with success with my Microsoft channel team. I used it with an Intuit team that I led for a while. And he was familiar with this methodology. And he said that he also, the other priority was to go and learn how to actually customize it, deliver it, which required certification and that sort of thing, and have that launched, as early as possible the following fiscal year. So I actually got very prescriptive things to go tackle first. The boot camp was the more urgent of the two, and I really started by doing a listening tour. I did have the advantage of having worked with these sales leaders for some time, and I knew them all pretty well. But then sitting down and just really whiteboarding with them and creating this whiteboard in my office full of what people felt like sales enablement meant, what they felt like they needed, doing the same with some of our successful and not so successful sales reps. And out of that started to come some themes that I could begin to build this boot camp experience around. One of the things I recognized early is there were some things I knew very well, and there were plenty of things that I didn't. And I learned how to leverage subject matter experts in the company. And I found in doing that there were two objectives that I could accomplish. One is the knowledge transfer that you would expect in this kind of environment. But we all know we're lucky if they go home and they retain 40% of that. There needs to be follow-up. But it's still important to have that initial transfer. But the second thing was, in that environment especially, people might only come to headquarters once. Sales kickoff was held somewhere else, so they may never come back to the head office forever. And there were people there that were going to impact their success from finance, from legal, from deal desk, etc. And it was a chance to not only hear from those experts, but also at least start to build a relationship. Because I have found that despite everyone's best efforts, when you're out in the field, things go sideways. But if you even have a little bit of a relationship like that, it just goes a lot easier when you kind of work things out.
Yeah, so I love that you started to get into the development side of also sales enablement, right? So I was curious about this, like as you started to implement and started to get traction, you had to go hire new people. This was a completely new thing for you, right? And so how did you educate yourself on what was needed and kind of define sales enablement and then be able to go and start to hire people and potentially educate them, right? Because it's not like you could go out and maybe do a search and be like, I need a sales enablement person. Not somebody floating around.
Well, at the time there was no SES. I was asked to join that. When did we found? Was it 2014? 2015? I can't remember. I was able to come in as a founding member. So this was well before that. And so I started with ATD. I think at the time they were still calling themselves the ASTD. And there was a sales enablement community of practice there run by someone named Roxy. And I actually found her to be incredibly helpful. I went to the annual meeting when there was the next one, spent some time there, and it was really just doing that and networking and meeting some people who were a little bit further along in the process, and learned from some great presenters there. One of the things that I discovered in doing that, I remember I signed up for it was a luncheon, I think, that was called Building Credibility with the Sales Team. And the things they were talking about were things like going out on ride-alongs with sales and understanding how salespeople are wired and how they think. And that was fine. I'm not criticizing the class, but when the light bulb went off for me, that I actually was further along than I would have thought in understanding sales enablement because I carried a bag and because I had led sales teams through good times and bad. And I'd seen companies do a nice job of supporting and developing us, and times when they didn't. And that was kind of an eye-opener for me and gave me more confidence then to leverage that experience as well as what I was learning from these new peers that I've met.
That's great. So I'm curious as well as you were hiring people, how did you go through that process in order to develop your team?
Well, the first thing that I needed to do was learn what the job architecture was in the sales enablement world. I wanted to make sure that I was building, prioritizing, I should say, and I was only, my first hire was just one single hire. I wanted to make sure that I identified the right area. I wanted to hire someone that could fill some of the, it's always good to look at what your weaknesses are when you have the opportunity to find someone that complements those with strengths and that sort of thing. And initially I really focused on people that came from a sales background. They didn't have to come right off the front lines of sales, but I felt like really understanding the life a salesperson lives is difficult without having been under that pressure of a quota, whether it's monthly or quarterly. Since then, I actually have a couple of folks on my team now that have proved me wrong, that you can be exceptional at sales enablement without having actually sold. But that's where I started. And in my case, I was able to identify pretty quickly where our gap was, where I mentioned that this particular EVP was opening new routes to market, and we needed to start doing real partner enablement. We had one traditional channel, but with all these new ones coming on, and so I went looking for someone that could come in and fill a channel enablement role. Now, as to our partner enablement, I think is what I called it, as there were only two of us at the time, we both still wore a lot of hats. But that's where I started and how I got there.
That's great. So I would love to kind of maybe fast forward a little bit to where you're at now and
Sure.
how that's grown and kind of what your progression has been. Do you mind giving some points of this is where you saw a shift and took on more? Kind of what were those maybe points between 2011 and today in 2019 that you feel like were really big from your own career perspective?
Okay, sure, happy to. The methodology that I mentioned, that I got certified. I customized it, wrote the playbooks and the role plays and all the things needed, and got certified to actually start teaching these multi-day workshops. Fast forward a couple of years later, and that implementation had not only gone very well for us and the way it impacted our revenue and our win rates and those types of things. We were truly differentiating ourselves with our customers and hearing that from them. And it actually became a case study by the methodology co-founders themselves, where they did a video and came out and interviewed my EVP and some of the sales leaders. And I was able to leverage that success and spend some time in the industry doing sales methodology and effectiveness consulting, which I really enjoyed. I was a business partner with that methodology. Vonage contacted me a couple of years after that, and I actually in contact, my employer in contact, when I've been talking about, they were my first client, and they actually kept me on as a consultant for about a year and a half. But when Vonage was recruiting me, it was very interesting. They had just gone through some acquisitions. They were getting ready to do more. And there was a chance to come in and really build sales enablement again, but this time on a multi-route to market, truly global scale. It was an exciting challenge. I liked our CEO's vision, where he wanted to take the company. And so here I am. But it really was starting back. I've been here 2.5, 3 years at the end of December. And it really was understanding what was needed. And the first several months were spent on the listening tour, out in the field, a lot out in the field, and understanding. Now, we did have some assets in place. With these acquisitions I mentioned, there had come a couple of trainers from one, a couple of trainers from the other, and they were very good. Some of them were doing really good work, but nobody was looking at it holistically. These teams, in a couple of cases, they didn't know each other. And again, it just comes from multiple acquisitions. So it was figuring out how to build that into a sales enablement strategy that would span those various routes to markets and product needs. And it took a few months doing that and presented to our CROs, the one who put me in the job. And and we launched about 6 months later as a team, and then we started hiring and filling some gaps.
Got it. So, and I'd be curious, you talked a little bit about this, from the time of your last role and then the consulting that you did and enabling the sales teams on, really differentiating how they sell and their uniqueness. Can you talk some about that and why that became such an important part of what you did from a sales enablement perspective?
Sure. Unless I go back to my time with Microsoft and Intuit, with those companies, you say I'm Paul from Microsoft, and that gets you instant credibility right away.
Right.
But there are very few situations like that. And so when you look at someone like when I was in the contact center market, for example, or even what we do now, our customers view us, I don't know if commodity is the right word, but it's awfully close. And we really need to differentiate their experience. It's an experience economy, isn't it? And we need to take that seriously and differentiate their experience with not only as little friction as possible and things you might think of, but how do we come in and talk to them about their business challenges and the outcomes that they're looking for, and then be honest with them and help them, assuming there are capabilities we offer that can help with that, then help them to create a vision of that. We tell our salespeople, as long back as I can remember, call high in the organization, call above the director, that sort of thing.
Right, yeah.
But very often, we don't enable those same salespeople how to walk in and have a business conversation. You may be talking to an executive 30 more years experience than you, and how do you go in and hold that conversation? My experience, Juliana, people buy from people who meet three criteria. One, you're authentic, right? Nobody is going to spend time with you if they don't think you are. Number two, you need to be confident. They don't need more friends. They might like you, they might not, but they need to feel like you are someone that really knows not only your business, but has taken time to understand their world. And then number three, they need to see that you are going to help them be empowered to do something they couldn't do before they met you. And that really summarizes where I get excited about helping our salespeople differentiate. But it starts very early in that first meeting that you've got to help them start to see that kind of relationship is a possibility.
Yeah, that's great. So I'm kind of curious of now where you're at today. What are some of the kind of exciting things that you're working on with your team to continue to push the boundaries now for Vonage?
Last year, I would say, all of 2018 was really a blocking and tackling year for us. All of the preliminary work I mentioned was done in 2017. And I feel we did a good job in understanding the needs and getting that blocking and tackling done. This year, as I looked at the strategy for this year, it was about building on that and really how next level gets abused. But I think you know what I mean, how to take it up significantly to impact the business. Everything we do needs to ultimately flow back to impacting the revenue. It's why we exist, and we need to always keep that in mind. And so one of the things I'm really excited about that we just launched is a brand new using technology inside of Salesforce. We happen to be a Salesforce shop, but being able to really help our frontline sales leaders globally with that first 90 days of success. We had things in place before, but with this new platform that we've leveraged with prescriptive playbook, by role, with being able to interact in a whole new way with most of our salespeople that work remotely, that has gone live with a soft launch this month. We're very excited, and we have our Vonage University class coming through in August. Will be the first beneficiaries of that. A lot of work has gone into building that out, and that's probably what I'm most excited about that we've just done. The other big project for us right now is using, you and I talked about this. Do you want me to reference the actual strategy that I was talking to you about?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that'd be great. We have a couple more minutes here, so Paul's going to give us maybe a little bit of insight into something that he's potentially covering at the Sales Enablement Society conference that's coming up in October, and give us a little bit of a view into some of that work that he's going to put on a much larger display when we're there.
Thank you.
Cool.
So there's a methodology that probably a lot of everyone listening, are familiar with from Kaplan and Norton out of Harvard, called the strategy-focused organization, and the concept of the balanced scorecard. long story short, the Balanced Scorecard is a tool that's designed to help any team of any kind to focus on the four lenses, if you will, that we need to be to make sure that we are doing the right things to impact the revenue. The first lens is financial impact. We happen to be internal service units, sales enablement teams typically, and this can be used with all sorts of industries use it. So it could be customer outward-facing, but ours is inward-facing. How are we impacting the financials? What are those metrics? How are we tracking them? Then our customer focus. What is the perception we need our internal customers to have of us? And then how do we, what are the key elements to driving that? The third area is what are our operational pieces that we need to have in place to make sure that we're delivering effectively, and then finally learning and growth. In other words, how are we continuing to develop and evolve as a team, and with the resources we need to stay ahead and continue to drive those other three areas. That's the Balanced Scorecard. It flows out of a strategy map, and it really helps you identify on a quarterly basis. These are long-term strategies, but then you drill down, and by quarter, looking at each of those four areas, what are the specific initiatives that the team is going to drive that's going to lead towards those outcomes. And there's a scorecard process and all of that. And we just launched that. We just had our Team H2 strategy offsite this week in New Jersey. I rolled that out to the team. We finished the scorecard together, and we're excited about it.
That's great, and hopefully many more of us can learn more about the details when we're at the conference and exactly kind of how you broke it down and what that looks like and how you're implementing it, so that we can also take that back and take some of that knowledge into our own companies and potentially look at seeing how we can do that from a scorecard perspective. Because I think, as we all know, the metrics are getting more and more important as they were even just a couple years ago. And it's still an evolving space for sales enablement to see how that can be applied. So I think it's great that you took something that other industries have done, are figuring out a way in which it works for sales enablement. And I think that's something that's of great value for the audience and the members that we have, and then to share what they've been trying to do and see how we can continue to make each other evolve and do things, in service of the businesses that we work for and the salespeople that we support. So that's very cool to hear.
Thanks.
Great. So we're going to wrap up. We are at the mark. So I really appreciate being able to have the conversation with you today. I love the 3 points about, the authenticity, being competent as a seller, and then helping them do something that they couldn't before you walked in. I think those are great points and something that we can all keep in mind. And, that easy reminder, almost an easy little checklist every time you think somebody asks you to do something, right? Is it going to help one of these three things happen? And if not, maybe it's not the priority that we should be focused on. I think that's of huge value for the members as well, and something I'll keep in mind myself.
Great. Well, I enjoyed this. Thank you for the opportunity.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Paul, and we'll see you at the conference. And I hope that everything goes really well for you.
All right. Have a great weekend.
You too.